Hi, everybody. Nick Blazier here again with another interview. Before we jump into that, I just want to share with you this quick screen of all the tournaments I'll be involved in with commentary coming up. So Gibraltar's next in early February. Maybe this will come out after that or something. I don't know. Whatever. But these are all the ones I'm doing through February, March, a little bit of April. But with me today, I have Thomas Tenland. He is G1 Grandmaster on BMAB. I just looked it up. Current PR of 2.89. I don't know if that's his it's like peak, and really solid with like the early game third roll stuff. And working on a book with that. But yeah, I just thought it'd be cool to have a conversation with him. So welcome, Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. How long have you been playing backgammon? You're like a younger dude like me. I don't think you started forever ago, right? But when did you get started?
Right. I'm extremely young. I'm 39. So, yeah. And yeah, I remember meeting you actually when I was in Vegas in 2015. And I think I had been playing for 3 years back then. So that should come to 10 or 11 now. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, okay. 2015 was probably like, I wonder how deep into the game I was by then. Maybe like a year or two or something like that. I was pretty early. I of
Right.
course
You
remember
were
this
very
too.
new. I
Yeah.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So no wonder I'm not playing at 2.89 yet. I've got it figured out. Okay. Just a couple more years and I'll be there.
Right.
Is that the arc you followed too? They were like 7 or 8 years in, you were like a five, and then all of a sudden you were at 2.89, right?
Yeah. Then it just dropped from there. No. Yeah. No, but on a serious note, I think it's around like a 4.5 was where I plateaued a little bit for the first time, and that was probably around then in 2015, maybe. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. That's a pretty quick rise to 4.5 then. That's impressive stuff. Um, oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I played a lot in the beginning for sure. So yeah.
Yeah, we all kind of have that itch when we first get started, right? I find it a little bit harder to study or keep like bringing the motivation to it. Um, but yeah, that was so funny to meet you. I mean, it was a great time. We got to hang out and have dinner a lot and stuff and became friends there in Vegas. But of course, we met in a first round pairing in the limited jackpot, as I recall,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
which was a pretty
I
unfortunate draw.
recall that. I recall that we were the only players in the limited jackpot, perhaps barring some Japanese guy, that were recording our matches. And very few people in the super jackpot even recorded their matches back then in the US.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's true. I remember that.
So what? How did you get started with backgammon? What like drew you to it in 2012 or whatever it was?
Yeah, then I had already been introduced to it like 5, 10 years earlier, perhaps, by my girlfriend at that time. We just played a few games and I thought it was fun, then didn't think much of it for maybe 5 or 10 years. And then I was like, yeah, I should look into backgammon. I think that was great fun. So um, I bought some books about it. I played a little bit on this Fibs server that was the shit back then. Perhaps not anymore to the same extent, but yeah. And then I quickly took part in a live tournament because by chance it turned out there was quite a big backgammon scene in Copenhagen, which is very close to where I live. I had no idea, obviously, but that was the case. So,
I gotcha. So you're in Sweden, but where in Sweden are you that's close to Copenhagen?
right, I'm in Malmo, so it's right across a bridge from Copenhagen.
Yeah, I remember taking the train through there on the way to Copenhagen for like the 2 days that I've spent there. So, very cool city. That's awesome, man. That's good motivation for studying and everything. Did you play a lot of games, I guess, before you picked backgammon specifically?
Yeah, I played poker back in the day when everyone in Sweden, at least, was playing poker, basically. I don't know what it was in the rest of the world, but
Same.
there was a time around it, yeah, right, around the new millennium, or maybe a few years after that, where you couldn't turn on TV without seeing some celebrity playing poker on it, and yeah. So back then I was playing poker. I was a winning player because it was almost impossible to be losing back then, but I was never a good poker player or anything.
Mm.
But I haven't played chess or bridge or anything like that. So as far as games, my career pre backgammon is just a mediocre poker career, yeah, or even less than mediocre, perhaps.
I gotcha. That's similar. I played a lot of poker before I got into backgammon too, but I also played a lot of like hearts and spades, like bridge-like games growing up, I guess, like trick-based card games. And then I really liked a lot of the like Settlers of Catan type like Euro games. I still play a lot of those. I was just curious if you
Mhm.
had like the mind, like the wiring for it already before you started to study backgammon, you know?
I see. No, not really, to be honest.
But you,
I
what do you?
played a few. I played a few. I played a few online games. There was this soccer manager game that you could play online. I mean, not like a fantasy game with real players, but you were like coaching a team. So you had your strategy for what they needed to train. What were they supposed to train? Shooting or stamina or whatever, and you set your team, whatever. That was it sounds crazy, but it was a strategy game that I was playing pre backgammon.
It
But
does
yeah,
sound crazy. Yeah, it sounds like something the kids would go wild for, right?
we did. I was a kid then.
I appreciate you calling it soccer too. Is that like the typical word for it in Sweden, or you just picked that up?
No, no, it isn't. I'm just trying to accommodate you as listeners.
Well, thank you very much for that. So your day job is something I can't remember what it was, but it was something mathy that felt like it translated. At least back in 2015 when we talked about it in Vegas, it was. What do you do outside of backgammon these days?
Yeah, I'm in market risk management in the financial industry. Yeah, so yeah, like you said, it's yeah, it has some common elements with backgammon and games and stuff, for sure.
Yeah, sure. Probability calculations and things like that, and equity, and I guess you're probably used to thinking about all the complicated math side of it, and then forming some strategy around that, I'm sure too. Like it's funny how a lot of those things really do translate almost directly to games in a way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It is almost in my experience, it can sometimes be that it's too similar of a task to be working on prior to playing backgammon later in the day. I mean, you
Mm.
ideally you want some sort of balance in your life, yeah. So it's perhaps I should have worked in construction or something instead,
Yeah.
because yeah.
I talk about that
But
all the time. Yeah,
you
I
have to.
go ahead. I was just
Yeah, no, I was just going to say. I mean, you have to stick to the few qualities you have and try to milk them as much as you can. Yeah.
yeah, it's good focus on your skill set for sure. But yeah, when I'm like working a day job, I've found quite a bit that I mean, I wouldn't say I was like doing management for a software company. Maybe it's some problem solving, but it's not exactly the same. And either way, it's just like spending all that energy through the day too. Didn't leave me with like a lot of energy for wanting to solve backgammon problems or study or teach or whatever. So I mean, I find that incredibly difficult to do when you're managing like a full-time regular life too. Um, I guess I just had a job where I wasn't like thinking that hard or something for a while. I have no idea how I had space for it in my
Right.
life somehow
Right.
earlier, but eventually it got harder. I don't know. Is that so? What like? How did you find space to really like study the game as quickly as you did in those first few years? And how have you like kept up with your study since?
Yeah. The last few years I've been actually working part time, so that's been part of that equation
Mm.
lately. Um, then also I if I was in some sort of more intense period where I really wanted to study the game more, then I tried to um, split the tasks so that I could do things on my working days that were not as demanding mentally. you know,
Hmm.
I don't know exactly what, but if you have 20 things you want to do, normally 5 of them are going to be very, very demanding mentally, and 15 of them are going to be something you can do without, your very best effort. So I tried to put those in the working days so that it worked out somehow. Um, but back then I was working a full-time job, but I guess it's just like you said, there's this enthusiasm that you have when you take up the game, perhaps, and it's also part of it is obviously also that it's much easier to improve from horrible to bad than it is to improve from good to superb. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, very true. So it's just, I guess, like as you were seeing the results of your study and the PR shaving off, like it's very motivating for those first few years to do that. What is like if you could, do you remember across your first 3 years there, like what the sorts like where you started and what the improvement looked like year over year?
You mean like a time series of PRs basically, or
Yeah, yeah. I don't remember mine,
do
so
I
it's a
get you
tough
correctly?
question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think when I played my first tournament, like 3 months in or something,
Hmm.
then I played like an eight,
Okay.
something like that.
It's a good starting place.
Uh, then yeah, as we talked about, after 3 years, when you and I met, then I think I played between a 4 and a 4.5, maybe.
Nice, man. Yeah.
Um, so and then yeah, so you can interpolate a little bit between those data points, I guess, and then from there to today. But of course it's not a straight line because you're going to have some plateaus, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
that's at least that's my experience, and I think most strong players or most good players at any sports experience.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure I've seen that as well. That like I think I ground down to maybe around the I don't remember where it was, maybe around the 5 range or something like that, but there's like somewhere where I like had a goal of a 4 and then it kind of spiked back up and like just like I wavered a lot in that area before I really got down to actually maybe being able to play at a 4.0 or something like that. Like there were and I've always found that as I like learn new concepts, like it takes some time to like figure out how to add them in before you're like consistently playing better. Like you kind of mess things up and jumble it up before it gets good again, you know?
Right. Yeah. There's Yeah, there are many things in there. I mean, for me, one of my biggest weaknesses has always been my slowness. So I think the last few years, maybe my main improvement has actually come from, yeah, going from extremely, extremely slow to slow. Um,
How did you
I, th-
accomplish
that,
that?
that Yeah, yeah. I think actually it's a matter of, I mean, the thing you mentioned about trying to incorporate new concepts and new things that you've learned or whatever. I think perhaps the last few years I did that to a lesser extent. So because of that, it helps speed up my game, and I think it also somehow adds to it that you've just played a certain number of thousands of games, and that just makes you play a little bit faster just because you see a few things a bit faster than you do when you've only played 100 games or 1,000 games or 10,000 games. So I think there are some different things that contribute, but one of them is also that it's something that I've worked on and tried to improve because I realized it was something that I could relatively easily improve, and that it could help my game. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's so interesting. We followed like such a similar path through this and you're just like much better. But so that's very cool. But like I've spent the last couple of years playing a lot of speed gammon on Galaxy and not really focusing on study as much. Um, But like I was working some jobs and things like that, and I didn't want to study with the same intensity that I had been. I didn't feel like I had room for that, right? But I wanted to keep up with it somehow. And what I found in playing a lot of speed gammon online was that I could like review it and see where my like instincts were way off in the beginning and start to like address these big like fundamentally looking at the wrong piece of the position to begin with. Like when is that happening? Instead of like letting the wheels turn forever and eventually figuring it out and seeing if you get there, like I feel like that would happen more often than not for me. But I felt like after doing that for a year or two or something like that, like my intuitive and immediate understanding of a position was more robust than it had been before, you know? And so it's like everything I knew, at least like there were more positions where you could just see it quickly and just immediately know it like where you should be. And that like brings a lot of speed along with it. But it brings like some consistency to your game too, I feel like. I don't know if you've found that while you've been trying to work on that slow versus fast thing.
Could be. I think some of these things are difficult to assess accurately, but I think um, uh, somehow I think if you try to play faster, or if you try to, yeah, not to incorporate too many new things into your game, whatever, it seems like you will be faster at finding uh, your errors and you will be faster at finding your right place. I mean, you're basically going to automize whatever it is you do over the board a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That is my perception of it. So
Yeah.
so it's a little bit dangerous in that you may establish some patterns that are not the best, and make them stronger as well. But yeah, somehow you in my experience, somehow you learn to produce the same result somewhat faster. Yeah,
Yeah.
whether it's good or bad in the given position. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. That must be like a real relative strength of yours, or a reason that you've gotten so good at backgammon then, is that you can spend a lot of time with a position and reasonably figure it out without being like too affected by these patterns apparently, or like these like instinctual things, which I mean if that allows you to come to the best decision every time provided infinite time, well that's not something that everyone can do with backgammon, right? Some people just look at it for 3 hours and they're like, I don't know, I'm confused. I would still just do the thing that I had an instinct about, you know?
Right, right. I mean, I'm not going to say I'm going to end up finding the best play all the time, but I think you're right that it's one of the things I do relatively well, is that if I have a lot of time, then I can figure relatively many things out. Um, but over the board, we have limited time, as you know. So it's a constant struggle of knowing when you should trust your instinct and knowing when it's not trustworthy.
Mm, yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of meta strategy to backgammon, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm like I find myself fascinated by this all the time too with like I mean, watching top players like Mochi or Sander, yourself, as an impatient commentator, when I have an instinct about it, but then I kind of like ask some questions about the position and say, well, maybe this, maybe that. Tough to decide. I guess you have to pick one. And then like a player will go on and think about that for another minute or two. I always like I'm so curious what that mental thought process actually looks like. Like, what are you starting to just go through all the roles? Or are you just thinking of new things that you didn't notice before? Or like, what is your typical like a long analysis of position look like?
Yeah, interesting. I think first you have to say it depends on the position, because
Sure.
that is another thing that you need to get better at over time in backgammon, that you will improve over time, is that you need to know what does this position require as far as analysis.
Hmm.
Is the most important thing here to figure out how many rolls are going to make a crucial point next time versus get hit this time, for example, or is it going to be more like, if I make this move, how is this going to play out down the line? or yeah. So it's basically this balance between tactics and strategy.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think so at least for me, that is going to be one thing that distinguishes some positions from others, is that in some positions you can really think like this. If I knew, if someone just wrote on my computer screen how many shots does this play leave and how many shots does the other play leave, I could just click one of them and say this is the play. I mean, easily.
Yeah.
So but then you have to, over the board you have to look, uh, yeah, you know. And these are also things that you get better at over time, counting the shots, counting the indirect shots, whatever.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but I think that but I think I have to say, at least for me, it's most of the time it's one of the two, is either the immediate sequence of rolls or it is how it's going to play out, and try to visualize a bit what's going to happen. For example, sometimes you're thinking about, should I run from the anchor? Perhaps then you have to think about, wait a minute, if I don't run, then I'm going to have to run next time anyway. Okay, then maybe I should run. For example, something like that. And it's
Mm.
not so much counting the shots, but more like reading the game.
Yeah.
Um, so it depends, is the answer, as always, I
Yeah.
think.
No, I think that's super helpful. So sometimes to see the strategic concepts, you just have to think a couple rolls ahead. For those, I think for me, those are the things that I see quickest. It's just like when I think there's some strategic call in the position, and then diving into tactics is always what takes me the longest. And my instinct is always that players like yourself or a Mochi or something must be doing a lot more of that, Sander included, even though he's like an intuitive player. Do you find yourself like double checking your strategic instinct with like going through sequences a lot or things like that, or are there times where you're just like strategically this has to be it and I'm just gonna do it, you know?
Mm, I think that would depend a bit on on the time constraints. Because over the board, I'm slow enough that I cannot double check everything I'm doing, because I would be in time trouble after two games. Um, that's just how slow I am. So I can't really do that.
Yeah.
Um, but if you said, okay, Thomas, go, you have as much time as you need. I'm not going to get mad no matter how slowly you play. Just try to play the best you can. Then yes, a lot of time would be spent
Hmm.
doing those kinds of things for sure.
Yeah.
But then I wanted to add to the previous question was also that I mainly now thought about checker plays, because when it comes to the cube actions, then I think it's most of the time it's a matter of comparing to reference positions. It's a matter of thinking about the impact of the score, and it's a matter of thinking about market losers and the size of the market losers, I
Hmm.
think. So
Yeah. Yeah, there's some visualization with the cube. I don't know where to start other than like understanding market losers a lot of times with teaching it. Teaching the cube is like a very tricky thing to me. Teaching the match score adjustments that I like did in my book is kind of like I feel like that can be simple if you want it to be, but like really having some system for evaluating cube action, a system like Pratt or something like that. Everything comes with so many exceptions that like the
yeah.
rules just start to like it just becomes a sea of rules, right? And like which one do I pick from? And so it feels a lot like there to me there has to be an element of like recognizing the current value of the position, recognizing how big of a change there's going to be to that. Does it like go to just this like crystal clear pass kind of thing? And like thinking one roll ahead like that, you know? I don't know. It's never it's not simple.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think also that most of these rules or ideas around cube handling, they sort of assume that your cube handling is already sort of on point. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, I mean, of course, it is useful um, for a great player to know that if I'm in doubt as to whether or not this is a take, I should probably double.
Yeah.
Um, but when I had played backgammon for a week, I was in doubt about every decision. Okay, then I should double and take everything all the time. So you know, so
Yeah.
so and it's the same about like this idea of if you have a 25% market losers on your next sequence, maybe you have an initial double.
Hmm.
Yeah, great. But I mean, I play a PR of 13. How do I know if I have a market loser? It's impossible. So so
Yeah.
so I think when you're starting out in cube handling, it's very very useful to know some borderline take pass references. I think that's extremely useful just for knowing, okay, approximately how big of an underdog can the person be and take a cube just in general.
Hmm. Yeah.
um, and similarly some references for when you double.
Yeah.
I think that if you're really bad at cube handling, it's much more useful to get a few of those references, and then as you build on that, then you can start to think like a good player does think about it. Are there market losers? uh, is this a take or is it a 100 millipoint pass?
Hmm.
That makes no sense to think about if you're bad at cube handling. Then I mean, at least in my opinion,
Yeah.
these sort of rules are they assume that you know what you're doing.
Hmm. Yeah. I find myself talking about that one in particular all the time too. The exact same example. I think it's so funny. Like I'm not sure about whether or not anything's a take or a pass, so I guess I should always double. It seems like a great rule, right?
Yeah,
Is that so? Your
but
study
that
of
being
yeah.
that being said, it's better than never doubling. So
Yes. Yeah. 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 So your study of the cube, does it look like? I guess it just looks like a lot of reference positions and tinkering with things and seeing a lot of it.
mm, yeah, I mean, I done a few different things actually because as for the early game blitzes,
Hmm.
early in my when I took up backgammon, I took many lessons with Stick,
Hmm.
and he told me that it's very important to know the early game and the holding games because that's basically what happens every game.
Yeah.
uh, so uh, so as far as the early game blitzes, I learned the classic reference positions, but I also spent a lot of time investigating variants of those positions. So say you have this classic 5-5 or 3-3 blitz reference position. Okay, how important is it if you've split your back guys with a 3, or how important is it if you brought down a builder into the zone?
Hmm.
That kind of thing. I mean, it's um, I think knowing the early blitz cubes inside and out is something that I do, and I think most strong players do. But I think it's very important if you want to have good cube handling. And then apart from that, most of the time I just took in matches that I played or anything. Whenever I made a big cube mistake or there was some cube that I didn't understand, I just tried to play around with the position and see if I could create the reference position, get more understanding of the position, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, man. That I echoes a lot of my study for sure. I mean, I was always just playing with positions that would come up in chouettes and stuff like that, and trying to figure out, was this right? What do I have to change to get it like across that borderline? What if I had this? And I've always found in my study too, the ones that I understand intuitively the least and really need to see the most of as a result are these like crashed positions. When your opponent starts to like has an anchor and is leading the race, but has started to lose their front position and things like that. I I don't know, like they just as I was learning that they didn't actually make sense to me, and I just had to kind of remember them and maybe play them out. Um, but yeah, those ones. If I'm not looking at examples a lot, I forget exactly what the right time to time those are, and I'm just guessing, and I'll be off by a lot. Do you have any like specific positions like that too that are like particularly challenging for you?
you mean like some class of position that I handle more poorly with the doubling cube, basically, or yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I don't know that I do. I probably do, but I don't think. But I think, yeah, certainly crunch positions are very difficult in general,
Hmm.
and the same can be true of some priming games. I mean, a lot of people talk about back games as very difficult. In my opinion, priming games are the most difficult games.
Hmm.
I mean, the difficult thing about back games is basically that you can make 20 moves in a row and neither of them is completely annexed. That is the difficult thing about back games.
Yeah.
But the thing about priming games is that you can have a choice where one of them is a 300 blunder, and it's very, very far from obvious what the best play is. I mean, if you're unlucky with what this decision you get.
Hmm.
So I think, and therefore the same holds true of priming game cubes, because you can have checker plays that are non-obvious, that are 300 blunders. Okay, then you can also have a cube decision that is quite difficult to get right.
Yeah.
But does that then mean that I handle it worse? That can be discussed. I mean, in my opinion, it's just that it's way more difficult.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. I like that. That's a good distinction there between. I find that with some like late game calculation, like hit or not kind of stuff, when there's like 5 point boards in play and things like that. I find the same magnitude of error very possible, with just like having to choose between completely different plans or like whether to try to win a little bit or just damage control. And these things are like huge swings. um, and require a lot of calculation that XG is happy to spit out a number about like there's a massive difference between these, but in our heads as we're calculating, maybe it's not as clear. So I don't know. I think of that class that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know. I mean, in general, as far as cube handling, my strategy is to become somewhat competent at all of the classes. I don't think. I mean, I already have a few classes like the early blitzes, and to an extent, I suppose, the holding games, where I feel like I have very, very accurate cube handling. Then in my opinion, it's okay to have mediocre cube handling in some classes. The important thing is that you don't have awful cube handling in any classes, as I see it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good point. I like that. You mentioned you took a lot of lessons with Stick when you were getting started as well. And I know you were studying third roles with him at the time too, and that's continued on. And I think you've gained like a reputation for knowing the checker play on the opening pretty inside out too. So I guess like when did you really get started digging into the details of like third role situations in your study?
Yeah, I started studying it a bit with Stick, like you said. So that was maybe in 2014 or something.
Okay, okay.
And but then I got sidetracked with, yeah, as you know, there are many things that you need to try to learn, and even some things that are not backgammon, unfortunately. And so but then I took it up again a few years later, when I studied it together with Thomas Christensen, in
Mm.
the Danish, very, very strong player. He was studying it, and he and I studied it together. So, and then now I'm also writing a book on it, and as a consequence, I study it once more. So
That's amazing. So, like, I guess before the 2019 UBC is when you were studying the third role of Thomas Christensen. Then is that about when that would be happening?
no, 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 it was earlier than that. That was maybe we did many sessions, but the first of them were maybe, I think, in 2016.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
as a matter of fact, I noticed that my game got much stronger in only maybe 3 or 6 months, right around that time. Of course, I cannot guarantee that it was because of that, but I think it was at least in part because of that. I think so.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think I remember talking. David Presser's another guy that like studies a lot of the opening or cube handling and things like that too. And I think he mentioned to me while we were studying like third roll positions that as he studied the third roll positions, one big takeaway that he had was that a lot of the second roll things that we memorize are really like exceptions in backgammon. And he kind of like it gave him a different reflection on the second roll memorization that we'd done. I don't know. Do you have any like big broad takeaways from studying the third role like that you think really helped your game?
I'm sorry, I lost you for part of your what you said there. So I heard the question, but I didn't hear the intro about David and his takeaways. Could you perhaps repeat it? I mean, maybe it's boring for the listeners, but it would be
No, of
nice for me
course.
to hear it.
Yeah, I was saying he pointed out that as you study the third roles, you start to see that a lot of the second role positions we have memorized are actually kind of exceptions in backgammon. And I was curious if you like noticed any big like broad takeaways or if you had any idea why you think the third role helped your game so much or studying it, anything like that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are some patterns from the third role that are recurring in backgammon, and there are some concepts, no question.
Hmm.
Then there's also, of course, the fact that perhaps the third role specifically comes up, and then you play it correctly. So that there's like a combination of several factors, but I think it spills over a lot to the fourth and fifth role, and that adds up. But yeah, it's interesting what David said there. I assume that he thinks about the fact that the opponent only has 8 guys in the zone and you have 5 guys on your midpoint. Those are things that often change quite quickly. So
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah, I noticed that in my teaching of the opening role too. Like the first thing that I tend to explain is like the opening position looks like this, and backgammon never looks like this again. And here's like the really exceptional things about that. And as soon as any of that changes, then you react differently, right? But in the beginning, we have all these like weird stacks of five and real disconnection, and fixing any of those is pretty good, right? Like it's very tempting in studying the opening roles to like learn that I need to slot with a 2-1, but I should split with a 4-1. But maybe it's like more valuable to learning the game to understand that they're both very close and maybe like 2 up is like actually not bad either. And like what are some other candidates that are close and why? You know, like what's going on with this? And I think it all comes back to just like how static that position is and how quickly it gets dynamic, you know? Um, yeah, yeah. So I guess you find a lot of
I
that changing in the third role. But go ahead. Yeah.
yeah. But I fully agree. It's extremely important to know. I mean, again, if your only goal is to play the first role correctly, then you're fine just memorizing what the best play is, obviously. But I mean, if you want to use this information for playing well later in the game, then it's very useful to know both why. I mean, what arguments there are for each of the variants, and also yeah, the difference between the best plays, yeah, and maybe not even the best ones sometimes.
Hmm.
Because if you know that you have a certain argument for slotting with a 4-1, and you know that argument got stronger, and you know that it was only wrong by 11 millipoints in the opening position, okay, maybe it's right now. Whereas if you just know that yeah, it was wrong in the opening position, maybe you're just going to guess it's still wrong. So
Right, right. It doesn't even come into your like thought train because you always slot with this one, so I'm always going to do that, or I always split with this one, so I'm always going to do that. Totally agree on that. So in your third role study, I guess I mean this the number comes out to it must be like 10,000 positions or something like this that we could study if we start including not only like the standard money response but score responses or even inaccuracies in openings and things like that. Um, so how many of these positions do you think you've looked at and kind of how do you organize your study of the third role then?
yeah. Um, well, I organize them the same way that I'm going to organize my book.
Sweet.
Unfortunately, cover 10,000 positions, but more like 10. No, but maybe 50 or 100. But what I the way I categorize them is probably that I look at what was my opening role. So that's one way of categorizing. How do I play after a 6-1? How do I play after a 3-1? How do I play after a 6-5, etc.?
Yeah.
And then you can also look into the opponent's role, especially in cases where your opponent rolls doubles. Maybe that is the more, you could say, dominant factor of the position. Maybe he rolled 5-5 and made his 3-point. Maybe he rolled double sixes, making his bar points. Yeah, then that is probably the thing that's going to be most interesting in terms of what your strategy should be. So that is how I categorize. But then you can also address different dilemmas after that categorization. So maybe, for example, after a 6-1, should I hit lose the 4-point or not? Or, so
Yeah, okay.
there's a lot you can do for sure.
Yeah, I got you. So you were saying somewhere in there that, like, I guess in the book, like, there's 10,000 variants maybe, but in the book you're going to be able to cover like 10 or 50 or 100 or something like that. Is that what you're talking about with that number?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. You
But
just broke
but
up a
then
little bit, so
again,
I wanted to repeat it.
but
Yeah.
I see. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah, but on the other hand, even though maybe only 50 positions are covered or 100, the concepts can perhaps be applied to 2,000 out of the 10,000 positions, or something like that, or maybe 1,000. So at least I think that the ideas can be applied to several positions.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot of truth to that for sure. Um, so how many, I guess, did you say how many positions you feel like you've looked at in the third role then yourself?
No, I didn't say. I think I've seen most. I mean, I've that is not to say I've studied them, but I mean I've put them up in XG and checked what the correct move was for probably most of them at some point. I think so.
Yeah, I got you. Okay.
But I don't know, and I don't remember.
Yeah.
I wrote down some comments and some my thinking about many of the positions. Not all, but many.
Oh, that's super cool. Okay. So you have a database of some, I guess, how many do you have where you've got comments on them, do you think?
Well, I have this very old school solution of just typing text into an Excel sheet.
Yeah.
But I don't know how many comments or how many pages or whatever. There's a lot, but I'm trying to condense the gist of it into this book now. So basically the idea of I think some famous writers said that I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one. It's a little bit like that I'm trying to condense it, and that actually takes a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, that's cool, man. I'm so excited to see that book when it comes out. You and I have been like chatting about it back and forth a little bit too. I never got too deep into the third role study, but it's something I could use for sure. Um, oh, I had some other question about it that I forgot here too now. Um, I was curious about like how much time in that study you put into like rolling out third role positions, or if you have any like big, I don't know, strong opinions about that.
uh, there's not a lot of time that I put into it. Definitely not. I have rolled some positions. For the book, I'm rolling out everything that goes into the book, just because it seems like the right thing to do. But it has not been something that's consumed a lot of time as I study the third role in general. I think as far as grasping concepts, as far as checking roughly what you want to be doing in different positions, XG roller plus plus is fine for the most part. So
Yeah, yeah. Are there
and
anywhere?
and it's also like what you said, before, whether something is right by 9 millipoints or wrong by 9 millipoints, it's not a super big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems that way to me too. And I'm curious if you had any positions you remember where there was like a really big swing in rolling it out, or if they're all like that kind of window where it maybe changes like a close play to the other side of a close play.
I don't recall, but I know that it can be the case when it's a matter of these early moves at the score. I mean, like 4 away, 2 away, or something like that. Then I know that perhaps it's because of cube action, perhaps it's because of the gammon value after the cube action, or whatever. Then I know that plus plus or lower levels can actually screw up significantly.
Mm,
But in a normal money game, it's usually at least close.
I got you. Yeah. It's such an interesting concept too, and like having written a book on it and thinking about how people are going to apply these concepts. Um, I mean, even in like the top like skill-based competitions, we're generally using plus plus at the highest level to analyze still, right? And so if you want to prepare for that, it's like curious to me whether you should be studying rollouts or you should be studying plus plus or what, like maybe you are going to win more games studying the rollouts, but your PR might suffer a little. I don't know. It's interesting to me. Do you ever think about that?
So your point is that perhaps I know that one play is the best play, but XG plus plus is going to claim another one is best, and then I should make that one. Yeah,
Potentially in a PR based competition,
yeah,
right?
it's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, it's a pretty sad thing if that's ever the case, I have to say. But
It is. It is. Yeah.
but yeah, but you're right. I mean, if the situation arises where you're 100% sure that that is the case, then yeah, of course you should do it. I mean, if it's the same as now what we saw in the UBC final in some situations. I mean, if you know that you're going to profit from something and that is what you're competing for, I mean, of course you should do it. I think it's right.
Yeah.
It's nothing wrong with that. It's quite the contrary. I think it's right, but I would not study it specifically. I would not specifically study XG's shortcomings in order to mimic them. No.
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing in like how the game's going to develop too. I am so even when we run a rollout on a position and it gives a very different result than plus plus, I guess it must be true that we should trust the rollout result, but it's not clear to me like to what degree of certainty or anything. Like I think what we know is that there's some fluctuation in the understanding, but it's entirely possible that with like better software if something came out that it'd be like actually the one that's screwing it up is the rollout and the plus plus somehow got this right with some like degree percentage of chance. I don't know. I'm just like curious what goes through people's minds when they roll out things and see like a different change and how they try to like explain that and assimilate that information. Like what do you do with rollouts?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because I mean, as I in connection with writing this book, I bought a computer that's really strong, just so I can do faster rollouts for the book. And now in the meantime, I'm letting it roll out 5-1 in the opening roll, and I'm using the settings plus plus for cube action and checker plays, and then a rollout using the setting.
Nice.
So and then it becomes kind of interesting. Okay, maybe the result changes slightly from the best rollout we have today, but which one is most similar to what a real game of backgammon looks like? Is it three ply and XG roller, or is it XG roller plus plus, XG roller plus plus? I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it becomes pretty philosophical and difficult to answer. I think, generally speaking, I think a rollout using XG's default rollout settings is fine, and in my opinion, should be trusted more than XG plus plus because
Mm.
essentially XG plus plus is a rollout. It is just a worse rollout than the real
Yeah.
rollout.
It's such an interesting thing to me though, because like on immediately the next sequence, if you're doing a rollout that's using like some sort of ply settings, well, on the next roll it should be more inaccurate. That well, I guess not than plus plus because plus plus is doing weaker ply settings. I don't know. I don't know. It all confuses me. I can talk myself in circles about this stuff pretty easily. But yeah, I guess that should do better because it's doing a higher quality rollout than plus plus is doing in that scenario. So yeah, yeah, makes enough sense. But yeah, if you're going to use plus plus in the rollout, that gets kind of funky too, doesn't it? Because then plus
Yeah, it's a
plus,
rollout of rollouts.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But the rollouts are on like a really low setting that plus plus does, right? Isn't it like one ply for a lot of it? I don't know. It feels like there's a bit
Yeah,
of inception to
yeah,
this when I like think about it, where I get lost
yeah,
and I'm
yeah,
like, I don't
yeah.
know why I want to mess with rollouts. I don't know what to do.
Right. I don't know either, but the good news is my new computer is very fast.
It does feel good to roll games out and get like that like 10,000 game
Right,
sample and be like, I must know now, right? I think
right.
certainly we've got an answer. Well, that's awesome. That's anyone wondering too. I mean, I always think about that when I get computers too, is like what will I be able to run XG with or do rollouts, and it's all the same. I think it's mainly you just need a nice CPU. Is that all you were looking for when you got yours?
It was. I was looking at this CPU benchmark website, and actually, it's the scores that my old computer got and the new one, and how fast they run an XG scale almost perfectly, and that has always been the case whenever I've bought a new computer, and that is also what I got from Xavier at some point. So that
Yeah,
seems to be the case. I don't know a lot about computers, but that seems to be
yeah,
what's going on.
yeah. I know a little bit about computers, and like the most entertaining thing to me is like I think XG. It feels like it was designed to be like the perfect CPU stress test. Like it will use all of your CPU and make your computer unable to do anything else while it's doing a rollout, if you let it, which is really
Yeah,
impressive.
yeah,
Like not many programs can actually do that. So
right. I noticed this my 5.1 rollout was at 100.0 when I checked the CPU usage. Yeah.
it's really impressive stuff. Well, cool, man. I'm so excited about that book. It's been an interesting conversation around that. Like, so while you're writing that, I guess what is your are you still studying backgammon, do you feel like? Are you just focusing on third roll for a while or what sort of goals do you have for improving your own game too while you're working on that?
Yeah, those are kind of low key for the moment, but then it is a nice side effect that even studying something that you know most things about already will actually help you a little bit because you think about backgammon and you uh, conceptualize a few things perhaps that you haven't internalized completely before and things like that. So I hope I can still play a little bit of backgammon, but it's but definitely it's gonna mean that I'm gonna work less on my own game for a little while.
Hmm. In the last couple of years, like what is working on your game looked like? What's your sort of structure for studying?
Yeah, that's I would actually say the last couple of years is where I have tried to do this thing about getting faster and everything. So I have not been studying as much when it comes to my, just getting better at understanding the game, things like that, as much. So perhaps more interesting to say what I did before that, and that was a lot of going over the errors that I committed in matches, sometimes trying to figure out what classes of positions do I screw up, and then trying to analyze them and understand how they should be played. That was what I did in the most successful cases, at least. And
Hmm.
in other situations, I just made a mistake and I tried to understand why it was a mistake and moved on. That's what I've been doing a lot of lately. But I think the most efficient way to get better is to, really try to master uh, categories of positions.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. It's because you need context for the fix that you're going to apply too, right? It's easy to look at a position and give yourself some justification for why it was a mistake and how it's correct later, and then find out like you apply that logic in another position and now get this other position wrong, right? And so if you're not doing it in this broader context, it's difficult to actually make like broad improvement, you know? You might just make other
Yeah.
mistakes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think if you're checking in the backgammon strategy group, Knack Ballard often posts variants to positions posted, and where you can often see that sometimes at least the changes that he makes are relatively slight and make very big differences to the equities of the different plays. So that is, I think that is a very good point, is that one thing is to stop making a given mistake, but it's another to stop making that mistake and avoid making another mistake that you otherwise would not have made, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. No, I completely agree. I think like the risk with those too, in a group like Backgammon Strategy, everyone's sharing basically their thought process and the answer it arrives at, or maybe not their thought process at all and just the answer you arrive at, right? And so either way, what you get is like it worked or it didn't on this position, but like truly understanding, is this a position outside of like the general rules? Like, is it exceptional? Is it one that you should get along with everything else with like one simple idea? Some of these kind of like broader integrating a position into your game are like it's just more complicated than seeing how people answer it, you know? And the logic that gets you there doesn't mean that it's like the entire logic of the position either. It's very fascinating to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can answer a question correctly with a completely wrong analysis. So yeah.
Right. Well, very cool, man. Are you gonna? I guess will you be out at UBC competing this year again?
Probably not the UBC this year, but I will be in Gibraltar in February.
Oh, cool, cool. Okay.
But actually, as far as UBC, one of the reasons it feels worse for me to go there this year is specifically that I know I will not be working on my game, and
Ah,
when it's a competition where you really need to be at your best, I would be more comfortable having worked on my game, even knowing that in the end a lot is going to be determined by variance anyway. But
sure, sure. Yeah, I'm curious how you think about like if you have goals for accomplishing something at a competition like a UBC or certain titles, or if you just like to play and hope to show up and like perform your best in each. Like, how do you think about showing up for tournaments like this in your BMAB stats and stuff like that?
mm, I don't think that much about. I mean, it's hard to um, it's hard to decide when you're going to play well and when you're going to play worse. Uh, um, I but I try to get better. I try to. I think now G0 is the closest BMAP title for me. I think I can very realistically reach G0 if I play my normal game. Whereas if I want to become Super Grandmaster, I feel like I must become a better player, or I must be very lucky over 300 experience points. But I mean, realistically, I need to become a better player, and it would be great if I ever became Super Grandmaster. But I think I am fully aware that if I want to do that, then I need to spend more time on improving my actual game than I'm doing right now. So
Hmm.
that's just a fact. That's just a fact. So that'll have to be settled by what my life is going to look like for the next few years. um,
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I think there should be like all this infinite sponsor money behind it, so we can like it can just decide for you that you will be a super grandmaster. That'd be cool
yeah,
someday for backgammon.
yeah. I can try to bribe Dimitri otherwise and see how far that will take me.
That's probably more efficient. Yeah, I never thought of that. There must be. I mean, yeah, corruption is probably the best way to get a title on there. I think. No, he seems too honorable, man. I don't think you could bribe that man. to corrupt his BMAP stats. They're very important to him. They, I can't believe like some of the conversations we've had about like whether matches or tournaments would count and things like that. Like just trying to figure out my individual submissions and stuff like that. Not that it's like a pain or anything, but it's just like they're very meticulous about it and they have an answer for it and they've thought this through and like, well, this needs to count or not because like what about these other tournaments? Like they're careful about it. It's really cool, you know? Yeah.
I think it's cool too because I should say I am now on the board of the BMAB.
Oh, okay.
I think it's cool too because at the end of the day, the BMAB titles and PRs are somehow only as valuable as people's trust in BMAB in general. So
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. I hadn't thought about that in a while. But I think there was a point where the perception of that was like that it was a system like, are people going to game it and what's it going to look like? I don't feel like that conversation comes up anymore. I think BMAP just is like tournament results in people's minds at this point. And if you have like a title on there, that's because you play that PR, you know? Which is really cool. It's kind of like a step that just happened with time and with their efforts, and now it really is a trusted source. So, I mean, like kudos on that to them and you now, I guess. It's Bernard Meyer's the one that actually.
Especially
Yeah, go ahead.
especially me after joining the board for one meeting. So
Yeah, yeah. Congratulations. We'll get the round of applause on that. But Bernard's the one heading that up now, right? Do I? What does the
yeah,
organization
he
look
is the
like?
CEO. Yeah.
Okay. And what is Dimitri's role in it now?
Um, I believe that he is vice president, but he is anyway. He I know he is very involved in the board and in work in BMAP. He's just
Yeah.
not CEO anymore.
Yeah, and Presser's doing something with that maybe too, like at least running tournaments out in Cyprus and stuff, or is that just kind of off on the side somewhere?
Yeah, he is on the board as well. I don't recall precisely what his title is, but he is contributing and putting in work on BMAB for sure.
Cool, cool. And to be clear, the board just all is deciding who's a grandmaster and who's a super grandmaster, and we just vote, right? Three votes
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
get to be
subjectively, subjectively.
just
And that's
kidding.
why so you can just check how many on the board are GMs, you know?
It's very important for them. Well, that's awesome, man. I guess are there like any like big initiatives with BMAP or that you've been involved with the board? Like what kinds of things are you deciding in your first meeting there, you know? Like what's in progress with it?
On the first meeting there, G0 was introduced as title. Um, there were some there was some talk of a future BMAB sort of yearly championship or world championship or something like that. I don't know what the status is of that,
Hmm.
but there was talk of that. You know, something sort of UBC-ish, but with some qualifying tournaments and stuff like that.
Oh wow, okay, okay.
Um, but I don't know what the status is of that right now. Yeah, yeah, I think at one point the experience point thresholds of some titles was raised.
Yeah, okay.
Um, I must say I don't recall that many points anymore because it was a while ago. But yeah.
Thomas joined his first meeting as board member and slept through it, is what I'm gathering from here.
Oh no.
High contributor. No, that makes sense though. I mean, of course, like they set up a bunch of titles and like ways to get them early on, and it wasn't clear from the start that these were the right. Like, I mean, is this actually what a grandmaster is? And it's just sort of hoping that it pans out that way or people agree with it. But maybe with time we'll find out that actually like a lot of people are playing at this grandmaster level, and maybe we should like drop that. So I'm sure there's like conversations that need to happen around that all the time about like experience point thresholds and do we have the right targets and all these sorts of things. So yeah, that makes sense for like the board meeting. I'll be interested to see if they come up with another like championship. I think that like moving more in the direction I like that they have like an elo system on there now, and they're like the closest we have, I feel like, for like this international big picture of of backgammon play and who the best is and what's going on out there, right? Like I always think of it as a bit of a database that way too. And so they're in like a great spot to pick out who the top players are and say we should have a competition with these like the best of the best, like the top performers, whether it's yearly or overall or whatever that is. So that sounds like a really cool idea. I'd love to see something with that.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, cool, man. I think this has been a good conversation. Maybe a good place to end it, unless you have anything else you want to get to.
I don't really just telling everyone to buy at least 10 copies of my book when it comes out.
Yeah,
But
yeah. When are you gonna make any estimates on it? Is it gonna be out this year,
it
2024?
is going to be out this year. It's going to be out this year for sure. I said I've said before that it was going to be out in spring this year. That's not going to be the case. But it's going to be out this year. That's a promise.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I look forward to it, man. I'll get 11 copies just to make you a little bit happier with that. All right, and we'll figure it out.
Thanks. I need it.
All right, cool. Well, thanks so much, Thomas. Tune back into this channel. I guess like the videos and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this kind of content. That helps me out. I'll be back with more interviews in a Friday in the future, and look forward to your book, Thomas. Thanks so much, and bye, everybody.
Thank you.